Hey everybody, this is Don again. It is time for episode 45 of Practical Reality. It is a Saturday afternoon. The sun just popped out from behind the clouds. It's actually now turning into a beautiful day. Let's hope that it actually stays this way. About 10 minutes ago, it was dank and dark and looked ugly. I was going to stay in the car for the video. It's funny, I want to get out of the car now, but now it's too late. I started the video, so I'm going to stay here. But it's actually getting nice and bright outside. The clouds are clearing up. It's about 53 degrees and a little after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So, the subject of today's video is going to be a subject that I find to be simple yet profound. Economics and spirituality. Can the two coexist? That was the idea I had the other day when I was actually sitting in the mall waiting for my wife to come out of work. And I did a little Google search. And I found so much information on the subject. I was really amazed to see how much information that there was out there. I didn't realize that anybody had actually, I shouldn't say I didn't realize anybody had actually thought about it. I hadn't thought about it. So I was wondering how many other people had actually thought about it before. And it turns out there's a lot of thought on the subject. And I was amazed to find all the content that I did. And I'm going to talk about 3 articles that I read and researched before I did this video. And I'm going to show, I think it's going to demonstrate the main point that I've made in many other videos, that putting profits over people is not the best use of all the available resources. So the first article that I found when I Googled the search, spirituality and economics, on my phone while I was waiting for my wife, was an article written by MIT. They're like an alumni newsletter about one of the alumni. Her name is Allison Tompkins, and she got her PhD in economics in 2011. And she is disabled. She has cerebral palsy. And she's a black woman. She became the first person who is confined to a wheelchair to earn her PhD from MIT, which in itself is a remarkable achievement. Earning your PhD from MIT is a remarkable achievement. Being able to do it while you're in a wheelchair makes it a more significant achievement. And she went on to have a normal economics career until her illness forced her to take a step back, and that is when she discovered the spiritual aspect of her life. And the way she married those two concepts is incredibly simple and powerful, which it happens that way very often. Concepts that are very simple can be very powerful. Is that her pursuit of economics, the reason she started pursuing economics in the first place, was to make the world a better place. And then when she had to take a step back from her work because of her illness, she simply took that same principle and applied it to her spiritual practice. And she made the focus of her spiritual practice making this kind of meditation and spiritual practices more accessible to people who are disabled. And I was so struck by that simple message. She took up her career to make the world a better place. And then when her illness forced her to shift her focus, she still carried that same principle into her next venture. So that's the guiding principle by which she lives her life. And I think that's incredible. As long as she operates by that guiding principle, then she's going to love whatever she does. She's not going to go into anything that doesn't help her to make the world a better place. And I think that's beautiful. And that guiding principle alone ensures that she's going to have a rewarding life. So she took that intention that she had to make the world a better place and applied it to both her economics career and her spiritual journey, which she is now sharing with others. I believe that she's written a book on the subject, which is, I'd like to get it. I'd find out what the title is. I didn't see that in the article. But, I mean, think about that. That's an amazing journey that somebody takes from one completely academic career to a more fulfilling spiritual journey. And she uses the same principle to apply to both to make the world a better place. That is an admirable person. That is a wonderful thing. So then let's move on to the second article that I found. It was written by a gentleman who is a professor at a university in Hungary. I think that this goes back to, I think, 1996. And his argument, very simply, is that the way that economics is pursued in the current environment is not the best use of the resources, and creates a situation that is unsustainable for life on Earth. And yet, what happens every single day, the continuation of this situation just is not being questioned. And it's accepted by people, and people are caught up in this endless cycle of work and stress and just challenges that make life less enjoyable. Now, this paper was published as a formal academic paper, and when you go there, you can't really read the entire paper. I'm not sure how many pages it is, but you have to pay, I think, like $75 to have access to it for 48 hours. You actually could download it and read it after that. But the whole point is, the paper itself is an academic paper written for a scholarly university, and you don't necessarily have access to it. But I'm sure that the arguments presented would be relatively convincing. And, you have to wonder, if this kind of information was more widely dispersed, what kind of impact it would have on the thinking that goes on in people's minds on a daily basis. And as you read what's called the abstract, or the summary of the paper, you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the webpage that he's also written an article called Spirituality, Religion, and the Economy. So this is not the first time he thought about this subject, and he's obviously explored it extensively. And then finally, we have an article published in 1983 by a gentleman named David Spangler. I didn't necessarily see his academic credentials, but it's called The Economics of Spirit. In his mind, the objective of both economics and spirituality is abundance. But the definitions of abundance that apply to economics and spirituality are 180-degree difference. Economic abundance, of course, is the accumulation of material wealth and, things and assets. And spiritual abundance is the development of the ability to share and give. And that is the way in which a human being becomes a more complete, fulfilled person. And his main central argument in the article is that, and something I've always felt as well, redistribution of wealth, the hoarding of wealth, is holding the world back. The redistribution of wealth into more hands would allow for the creation of more ideas and the ability of other people to give back to society. So think about the mathematics of it, think about it in the same terms as like the velocity of money in the economy. If you have one person who has the ability to give a lot of money away, their potential is limited by the number of ideas they come across, right? If you then distribute that money to thousands of people, which would make thousands or maybe millions of people's lives better, those people then have the ability then to create greater wealth using that money, and then possibly have the ability to then give away their own wealth and back to society, and or create new businesses or new jobs with that money, then think about how more productive the whole economy becomes as a result, which is not a revolutionary concept, but it's one of those things where, the way that people glorify the rich and think of everybody as geniuses who has these billions of dollars, you have to wonder how much genius can you attribute to them, given the fact that many of them are not necessarily that involved in philanthropy. I'm not going to name any names here, but we know of the ones who are heavily involved in philanthropy, and there are some people, of course, who go about their philanthropy quite quietly. But Bill Gates and Warren Buffett make it public, the fact that they give their money away, which means that a lot of people probably, like I said, give money away quietly, but there are still a lot of other people who don't give their money away, who keep that money for themselves. And if you think about the potential that they have to generate goodwill and greater wealth for an enormous amount of people, that would ultimately end up benefiting them as well. The people who now hold the billions would also benefit. It would be a huge, making the pool just larger and larger and larger until everyone benefits from the philanthropy that they can ignite with their move by putting the money in the hands of others, who then can multiply and distribute that money into businesses and new jobs and into the hands of others who need it, and then thereby create another round of creation and philosophy. And all of that can be said to have a spiritual basis. And his view of people is also kind of insightful, if you ask me. Being able to work, he sees as a gift. So being able to put your passion into what you do then automatically gives you a more spiritual outlook, because you are then more passionate about what you do, and you convert that into greater fulfillment for yourself. You can then give the gift that you have away to others, and therefore serve a dual purpose, an economic as well as a spiritual purpose. And then the final conclusion that he makes is that work is necessary for survival in society, but your spirituality is necessary for your growth. So, as I said last week, why not marry the two? Okay? Why not have an approach to life that allows you to flourish in both realms, where you work and you derive your satisfaction and your material existence from your efforts, and then take the extra step and allow yourself to actualize and grow spiritually so that you give back to the world and derive greater satisfaction from the work that you have done. It makes perfect sense. And the last point he makes may be the most powerful. Each of us is a gift, or has been given a gift. There are two cells that unite in the act of creation, that sacrifice themselves so that a person can be created. I've never thought about it in those terms before, but that actually is the way it happens. There's a sacrifice being made by a cell from a man and a cell from a woman that unite for the greater good in order to create a person. They merge, they subsume, and a person is created and develops. And that is a gift. So each of us has been given the gift of life, and we bring this gift forward into the world. It is our responsibility to make the best use of that gift that we can and present ourselves the best way that we can to the world each day. And that, for me, includes both development as a person and as a spirit, as someone who then gives to the world of his time and his efforts after what he has done to secure himself material security, gives himself to the world in his time and efforts for the good of others. So for me, the conclusion that I have to draw is that there is a better way, and that what I have been thinking of through all of these videos and for 15 years is sort of validated. You know, I started out just looking for a connection between spirituality and economics, and what I found is a connection between the divine and the human. Because here we are, which is a greater context, because here we are as people existing in a world that has nurtured us. And what are we giving back to that world? Some people are, some people aren't. And there are too many controlling forces out there stopping the world from reaching its potential. And when we take a more spiritual approach and stop emphasizing profits over people, which is what all of these articles have talked about, then we realize tremendous benefits for all of humanity, including those who now hoard the resources. So there really is no reason to not pursue that path, to not go that way. But there are too many minds out there who are closed and who ignore the spiritual aspect of life and who only focus on the accumulation of material goods. And they are holding their own potential back. They're limiting themselves and limiting the ability of others to develop themselves as well. And that is a shame. And I would not want to be held back into that sort of trap. And the only way to realize that you are in that trap is to take the step of starting to develop yourself in a spiritual way. And I think that would be, imagine, something else I've said in other videos, imagine if everybody started to do that, the power of what it would bring. And this is, for the first time, I've really, taken that idea in my head from theoretical to practical. And that's where we are today on Practical Reality. I have come full circle in just the space of this video, realizing that there's a concept out there that I've thought about for a long time, that putting people ahead of profits would be beneficial for everybody. And here I have found ideas that are as old as 40 years that absolutely confirm the same notion. And it feels good to know that there's a lot of other people out there who think the way I do. And not to say that I didn't think there were in the first place, but it's actually been written down and validated and recorded for posterity and put out there as an academic idea for others to examine and consider. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. So that's going to conclude today's video. Like, comment, and subscribe. I hope everybody gets something good out of this. I wish you all peace, happiness, and prosperity, and the marriage of your spiritual and your practical life. Have a great day. Thank you very much.